Here is your story, 3,000 words, clean English, no headings, no titles, no violated content. The evening started the way all royal evenings started. Quietly. The kind of quiet that had nothing to do with sound. The hall was full of voices, full of crystal glasses touching each other in small, polite collisions, full of shoes moving across marble floors. But underneath all of it was a particular kind of silence, the silence of people who knew exactly where they stood and were very careful not to step out of it. James Whitmore had been standing in that silence for 22 years. He was a royal protection officer. Not the kind that stood at gates. The kind that stood inside rooms, in corners, near doors, with their hands clasped in front of them and their eyes moving in slow, careful arcs across every face, every gesture, every shift of weight from one foot to another. He had learned early in his career that the most important things that happened in these rooms were never the things anyone talked about afterward. He took his position near the east wall at 7:07. He always arrived before the guests. He always left after them. In between, he watched. The room tonight was a formal reception at one of the palace's smaller function halls, smaller being a relative word, because the ceiling was high enough to make most men feel suddenly aware of their own size, and the chandeliers above threw light the color of warm honey across everything below. About 60 guests. Ambassadors, arts patrons, a few senior members of the household staff, and, as always in these gatherings, family. Princess and arrived at 7:14. James noted it the way he noted everything, without moving, without expression, with only a small adjustment behind his eyes. She came through the far door with 2 members of her personal staff and she crossed the room in the direct way she always did, without pausing to take in the scenery, without looking up at the chandeliers the way first-time visitors always did. She had been in this room hundreds of times. She wore it like a coat. She was 73 years old and carried it without apology. There was a way that certain people moved through rooms, not arrogantly, but with a kind of gravity, as if the air parted not because they demanded it but because it simply recognized them. And had that quality. She always had. James had watched her for 6 years now, and in that time he had developed a deep, professional respect for her that he never spoke aloud and did not need to. She was precise. She was disciplined. She had a memory for names and faces that was almost uncomfortable in its accuracy. And she noticed things. That last part was the one that mattered most to him tonight. He saw her eyes move across the room in the first 90 seconds after her arrival, a quick, thorough sweep, like a hand running across a surface to feel for anything out of place. She greeted Lord Ashford near the window. She exchanged a few words with the French cultural attaché. She accepted a glass of water, not wine, and held it in her left hand and never drank from it. Then her eyes found Tom Parker Bowles. James had already found him, of course. He had noted Tom's arrival at 6:58, 12 minutes early, which had surprised him, because Tom was not typically early to things. He was Camilla's son from her first marriage. 49 years old. A well-known food writer and critic. Personable in public, opinionated in print, and comfortable, genuinely, almost organically comfortable, in rooms like this one, in the way that people are when they have grown up in and around them without ever quite being the center of them. That comfort, James had learned, was sometimes its own kind of risk. Tom was standing near the drinks table, talking to a man James recognized as a senior editor at a London publishing house. They were laughing about something. Tom had a particular way of laughing, wide, warm, with his whole face involved, the kind of laugh that made people nearby want to know what the joke was. It was genuine. James did not doubt that. But it was also loud, by the standards of the room, and it pulled attention the way a bright color pulls the eye in a painting made mostly of gray. And noticed. James watched her notice. He watched the precise angle of her chin change by perhaps 3 degrees, not a turn, just an orientation, the way a compass needle shifts, and he saw her eyes rest on Tom for a moment and then move on. Her expression did not change. It never did. But James had spent 6 years reading the things that happened beneath her expressions, and what he saw now was a careful, quiet act of registration. She was taking note. He filed that away and continued watching. For the next 20 minutes, the evening moved the way these evenings moved. Conversations rotated. Glasses were refreshed. A small string quartet in the corner played something that no one was listening to and everyone appreciated. James moved his eyes in their usual slow circuit and found nothing that required action and everything that required attention. Then Tom began to drift. It was gradual. First he finished his conversation with the editor. Then he spoke briefly with a woman James did not immediately place, an arts council director, he thought, based on her badge. Then he moved toward the center of the room, and then toward the left side of it, and then, and this was the moment James's attention sharpened without any outward sign, toward the cluster of people where Princess Anne was standing. There was nothing unusual about this on its face. Tom Parker Bowles was family, in the way that royal families create these rings of connection, not direct, not titled, but present, known, and understood to belong in a certain proximity. He had every right to be in the room. He had every right to approach. What he did not have a right to was what happened next. And was speaking with two people James knew well, Lord Pemberton, who was on the board of a national museum, and a woman named Dr. Sarah Ellis who ran a significant conservation trust. The conversation was about funding. Specific, technical, serious. And was listening to Dr. Ellis with the focused attention she gave to subjects she had studied, which meant she was not performing interest, she actually had it. Tom arrived at the edge of the group. He waited, which was correct. He smiled, which was appropriate. And then, when there was the smallest pause in the conversation, a breath between one sentence and the next, he stepped in. And he addressed Anne by her first name. Not, Your Royal Highness. Not even the informal but still respectful, ma'am, that family used in private. He said, Anne, lightly, easily, the way you might say the name of a friend you'd had lunch with last Tuesday. It was one word. It lasted less than a second. In a room full of noise and music and the overlapping conversations of 60 people, it was almost nothing. Almost. James felt it land the way he felt most things in these rooms, not in his ears, but somewhere lower, in the part of the body that is trained to respond before the mind has finished its sentence. His eyes moved to and in the same instant the word left Tom's mouth. Her face did not change. That was the thing. Her face did not change at all, and James knew, with absolute certainty born of 6 years of watching her face not change, that this was not nothing. He had seen and received bad news without changing her face. He had seen her stand in a receiving line for 3 hours and greet each person with the same controlled warmth. He had seen her handle a microphone failure at a public address and simply wait, without embarrassment or irritation, until it was fixed. He knew what her neutral face looked like. This was not her neutral face. This was something more deliberate. A face that had been decided upon rather than rested upon. There is a difference, and it is very small, and almost no one can see it. James could see it. She responded to Tom. Briefly, pleasantly, in the way that allowed the exchange to continue without incident. She did not correct him. She did not acknowledge the misstep in any way that anyone watching casually would notice. The conversation continued. Lord Pemberton said something. Dr. Ellis responded. Tom laughed at something and the laugh was still warm, still genuine, and still slightly too large for the space it occupied. But then Anne looked at James. It was the work of a single second. Less. Her eyes moved across the room in one of her regular, almost imperceptible surveys, and they stopped on him for a fraction of a moment, not a plea, not a cue, not a signal of any kind that could be written down or reported or used as evidence of anything. Just a stop. A pause. The look said, "You saw that." He held her gaze for the precise amount of time that was professional and appropriate, half a second, no more, and then he returned his eyes to the broader room. He did not nod. He did not react. He simply confirmed, in the silent language of his profession, that yes. He had seen it. She looked away and continued her conversation as though nothing had interrupted it. 12 minutes later, one of the senior household staff, a woman named Margaret, who had been with the palace for 30 years and who James privately believed knew more about the workings of power than half the people in the room, appeared at Tom's elbow. She was small and quiet and utterly unassuming, and she had a particular skill that James admired enormously. She could redirect a person without that person ever understanding they had been redirected. She said something to Tom. Smiled while she said it. Touched his arm lightly. Gestured toward the far end of the room where, she apparently suggested, there was someone he really should meet. Tom went. Still smiling. Still easy. Still completely unaware. James watched him go. He looked back at Anne. She was speaking to Dr. Ellis again, fully attentive, as if the conversation had never been interrupted at all. She did not glance toward Tom. She did not glance toward Margaret. She gave no outward sign of having noticed any of it. That, James thought, was the thing about her that impressed him most. It was not toughness. He had seen tough people in this work, people who were hard and sharp and used their authority like a blade. And was not that. It was something quieter and more difficult. It was the ability to feel the full weight of something and continue on without putting it down, because putting it down was simply not an option she considered. He thought about Camilla, not as a subject, not as a professional consideration, but as a human fact. Her son had just been gently, invisibly, and completely handled. She would not know. She probably would never know. Tom himself might not understand what had happened, might go home tonight thinking it had been a pleasant evening, might write something in a notebook about the Conservation Trust and the string quartet and the excellent wine. He would not write about the word "and" or about the fraction of a second that followed it. But it had happened. And James had recorded it in the only place these things were truly recorded, in the body, in the memory, in the long, accumulated understanding of what it meant to stand in rooms like this one and pay the kind of attention that most people in the room were never even aware was being paid. The function ended at 9:30. Guests moved toward the exits in the gradual, unhurried way of people who knew that leaving too quickly was as notable as arriving too late. Tom left at 9:20, still in the company of the publishing editor, laughing about something as they went through the door. He did not seek out and before he left. James did not know if that was by choice or simply by the natural drift of the evening's movements. He suspected it was the latter. He suspected Tom did not feel, at any conscious level, that there was anything to seek her out about. And left at 9:37. She stopped on her way out near the door where James stood, as she occasionally did, not always, not predictably, but sometimes, when the evening had contained something worth acknowledging in the way that people in their particular professional relationship acknowledged things, which was to say, without words, and without sentiment, and without anything that could be overheard or recorded or turned into something it was not meant to be. She paused. She looked at him. Not the survey look, not the one she used to read the room. A different one. "Good evening, James," she said. "Good evening, Your Royal Highness," he replied. She moved on. That was all. It was, by every measurable standard, nothing. Two people exchanging a pleasantry at the end of an event. Unremarkable. Barely worth noting. The kind of thing that happened hundreds of times in a career like his and left no trace. But James knew, and she knew, and this was the thing that lived between the words, that it was also an acknowledgement. Not of the incident specifically. Not of Tom, or of the name, or of the moment her face had become deliberate rather than rested. Just an acknowledgement of the fact that he had been present, and had paid attention, and had seen what was real beneath what was visible. She had said good evening. What she had also said, in the language below language, in the space between the professional and the human, was, "I know you were watching. I know what you saw. And I know you will carry it the way you carry everything else, without complaint, without disclosure, without ever making it into something that serves your own story rather than the work." He stood at the door while the last of the guests filtered out and the staff moved through the room collecting glasses and folding napkins and returning the space to the neutral, waiting blankness it held between events. He stood there until his shift ended, as he always did, and then he signed out and walked down the corridor and took the back stairs and emerged into the cool London evening. He did not write any of it in his notes. Some things were not for notes. He buttoned his jacket against the September air and walked to his car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. 22 years. He had watched a great number of things in 22 years. He had watched arguments avoided and decisions made in moments past that the people inside them did not fully understand. He had watched the difference between what was said and what was meant, between what was shown and what was felt, between what the room thought had happened and what had actually happened. He started the engine. One word had been spoken tonight. One small, easy, confident word, the name of a woman who was not merely a name. It had lasted less than a second. No one in the room had understood it except the woman it was addressed to, the woman near the door who had gently and completely resolved it, and the men standing against the east wall who had been put in that room for exactly this purpose. The guard noticed everything. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. He drove home through the quiet London streets and did not think about it anymore, because thinking about it was not his job. His job was to see. To hold. To be present in the rooms where things happened and carry what he witnessed in the professional, careful, permanent way that left no outward trace and never fully left him either. The evening had been uneventful. That is what the record would show. He knew better. He always did.